the Koch brothers put up the money, apparently over $600 million, to fund the purchase of Time magazine by Meredith Corporation, an investment group. And there's a funny little clause in there, according to Think Progress, that says that the Kochs get to review the operations of Time magazine every quarter, I believe it is. Charles Alexander is on the line with us. He is, at the moment, a contributor to The Nation magazine, thenation.com, and of course you can tweet at The Nation. But most importantly, he was the international editor at Time magazine. Before that, he was the science editor at Time magazine, the business editor at Time magazine, and a reporter and writer for Time magazine. Charles Alexander, welcome to the program, Charles.
Thanks, Tom. It's great to be here.
Thanks for joining us. So tell us, what about Time magazine would be lost if it was purchased or controlled, run to the benefit of a couple of petro-billionaires?
Well, what I'm most concerned about is the fact that for 30 years, Time has been warning about the dangers of climate change. We had a Planet of the Year cover 30 years ago. We had the Earth as a fried egg and a skillet on the cover much more recently. So we've been trying to warn people about this, and at the same time, the Koch brothers and other petro kingpins have been financing a campaign of disinformation to convince everybody that global warming is no big deal. So the thought that the Kochs would have some influence over Time, and suddenly Time would say, well, no, wait a minute, never mind. It's not a big deal. All those covers we did, forget it. Climate change is no big deal. That would be the biggest tragedy for me personally, because I edited all those covers over the years.
Wow. We're talking with Charles Alexander, former international editor at Time magazine, right now a contributor with The Nation magazine. Charles, looking at this from a political point of view, I can understand where you and I and other people who are not right-wing libertarian crazies, I mean, I don't know how else to say it. Even the middle in America would not agree with the positions that, for example, David Koch ran for president on in 1980, eliminate Social Security, eliminate public education, basically just, shock the entire country. But the politics, I mean, we can sit around and bemoan the politics all day long. This is perfectly legal. And I'm wondering, how do we solve the problem of a political cancer in our system? I mean, you've got, for example, Donald Trump. The Washington Post has been keeping track. He lies on average 5.5 times a day in public to all of us. It's going to be 2,000 lies by the end of his first year. Major lies. Right. We're not talking, small things like, that was a nice dress or something. I mean, we're talking major lies, right? And he was backed by the billionaire Mercer family, and now you've got this lie that climate change is unconsequential. That is being backed by the Kochs and by ExxonMobil, has been over the years. Their funding of groups like Heartland Institute and whatnot to promote global warming denialism. How do we, as a society, how does America as a country, particularly keeping in mind the very strict injunctions of the First Amendment, how do we police our media in a way that requires a certain level of honesty? I mean, the Fairness Doctrine back in the day required radio and television stations to program in the public interest, and that was determined by the public. They could complain, and every station had to keep a public file, and that public file was reviewed every 2 years when their license renewal was up. Now that's been expanded to 5 years. The license renewal isn't contingent so much on the public file. What's his name? Reagan blew up the Fairness Doctrine. And that, I think, had bled over into print media, saying, hey, here are the standards, journalistic standards. Because you could argue that back at the turn of the 19th to the 20th centuries, in the 1890s, you had William Randolph Hearst saying to Frederick Remington, just get me the picture, or the illustration of the USS Maine or the war in Cuba, and I'll give you the war. And that led to the Spanish-American War. How do we do this? How do we make sure that our media is actually telling us the truth? Or is that even not, you know, a value that we should be enforcing at law?
Well, it has to be, Tom, and, you know, I have no simple answer for you. I mean, the biggest problem is that now with the addition of the Internet, everyone has their own media. I mean, we're talking, and progressive people are listening to us. But the people that need to be listening to us are listening to something else altogether. So we all have our own media. We're all talking to ourselves. And so it's not a simple problem. I hope that Trump what he's doing is so outrageous. And what Fox News puts on the air is so outrageous that it will eventually just totally discredit itself. I mean, we have a president who's been colluding with the Russians. You know, conservatives used to think that communism and Russians were bad. And now we have a conservative president who's colluded with them. So maybe that will be so outrageous that it's going to discredit all this business.
Well, I think this raises a good and important question, Charles. We're talking with Charles Alexander, the former editor of Time magazine. Right now writes for thenation.com. And you know, my dad considered himself a conservative. He joined the Army at the tail end of World War II, was part of the occupation of Japan after the war. And he was a Dwight Eisenhower Republican, and he called himself a conservative. And he could tell you what conservative values were. I don't see any of those values being played out in modern-day conservatives. My dad has passed away, you know, within the last decade, but I have to think that, you know, the Republicans, he would have been in his 80s now, that Republicans of that age, Republicans who have actually, you know, who actually remember Dwight Eisenhower, even Richard Nixon for that matter, you know, the reasonable things Nixon did, have to be just shocked at the way that the word conservative has been turned into a handle to describe basically rolling over and playing dead for, or even actively campaigning for, the interests of transnational corporations and billionaires.
I know.
What's conservative about
like
that?
The only conservative value left is more money for rich people. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. That seems to be the only thing. I mean, this tax bill that Congress is considering now is a total travesty.
Yeah.
It raises, it's going to eventually raise taxes on the middle and working classes and give a huge tax benefit to all the wealthy. I mean, over $1 billion to the Trump family alone when Donald Trump passes on. His kids will get a huge break. So this seems to be all that's left of conservatism, but I know that there are some sincere conservatives, like your father was, who are just stunned by all this. So that's what I'm saying. I hope it becomes so outrageous that the pendulum will swing the other way. I hope that this is the last gasp of white supremacy
and patriarchy.
But
Yep.
you know, it's scary when you have the big corporate money behind it, when corporate interests take over a company like Time Inc. that was founded with journalistic integrity.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a problem. Charles, we're out of time, but thanks so much for being with us today.
I really appreciate the opportunity, Tom.
Thank you, Charles.
Nice talking to you.
It's been great talking with you, too.